So I'm going to start actually this presentation talking about the evolution of medicine and the evolution of clinical practice, because we talk about all the geek speak and we talk about all the interoperability, but what this is all about is us. Fred Trotter, I think, very nicely said the patient is a first-person noun, and health data interoperability is all about us, and it's all about us and our kids and our family, and making sure that they're well treated. And there's been an evolution that's in progress in medicine, and that evolution started with patient-centered medicine. Patient-centered medicine meant the doctor came to you. They couldn't do much for you, but they came to you and they treated you and they mopped your brow and did stuff like that. And it was extraordinarily personal, and the physician who treated you knew a lot about you, knew your family history, knew what was going on, and could make great treatment decisions about you. But the limitation of that model is there's only so much that that person in the horse and buggy with the leather satchel can actually do for you. And so we had to evolve in the practice of medicine to a different kind of practice of medicine. And that practice of medicine is an intensive, this is kind of a disturbing picture because those aren't real people, but it's kind of an intensive practice of medicine, and it's an episodic practice of medicine. So instead of the doctor coming to you and knowing something about you, what happened was we developed a practice of medicine where you've got a problem, you go to somebody, they do their magic incantations, they do their tests, their procedures, they figure out what your problem is, and they do something about it. They treat you. And they treat you with all kinds of cool gadgets and gizmos and doodads, and all the technology, as David mentioned, all the technology, not all of the technology, most of the technology we developed in the area of healthcare has actually been around the magic doodads to figure out what's wrong with you, and then the other magic doodads to actually make you better. And those magic doodads are pieces of electronic equipment, or they're chemical compounds. And there's tons of really, really cool and intriguing technology that go into all of that. If you look at, in the drug development area, if you look at how they model with huge computational farms, basic biology, and come up with compounds to treat you, there's tons of technology there. The basic business model, though, is still a business model of, I got a problem, I go to somebody, they figure out what my problem is, magically I'm better, they got treated or I die, but magically I get better, and then I go back, into the ordinary, my ordinary life. So that's an episodic model of care. The problem with that episodic model of care is that it's forgetful. It doesn't know who you are in between episodes. It's kind of like the HTTP of healthcare, right? It's fire and forget. It's got no context, which is great for those kinds of problems. It's not so great when you have problems that are long running and continuing, and you need to know something about the patient in order to get a better treatment outcome. And it also doesn't work that well when medicine is collaborative. Right now, the collaboration model is I go to a place that has all the people, and they collaborate, and they cure me, and then I leave. A lot of the practice of medicine these days is collaborative across multiple settings of care and across long expanses of time. So what we need to do in this country and in general, because every industrialized country is facing the same problems, is we need to make a care transition to patient-centered care. And there's a bunch of different models for that care transition that need to happen. But essentially, there's a lot of people that need to collaborate in the care of that patient. If you go back and look at ACA, the healthcare reform bill, a lot there's all the energy, all the ink that's been spilled over covering people has been legions and oceans of ink. I guess you can't have legions of ink, but you can have oceans of ink. There's been oceans of ink spilled over covering people. A lot of the interesting bits in health reform are actually about experiments in how we pay people to take holistic care of the patient. And so we're going to need to make, we're going to be starting to make in this country, and again in other industrialized countries, a model of a different care model and a different payment model, and we need a different IT model that goes along with that transition. So we need a care model, a payment model that rewards people for taking care of the whole patient over periods of time, and we need an IT model, we need an information model that starts to reward the same kinds of things. And so our IT model is going to start to move from pieces of paper and a clipboard, which is the dominant IT model. It's moving to EHR systems, electronic health record systems, that by and large automate around a single setting of care. And so if you wonder why interoperability in this country is so bad, it's actually a business model problem. It's less of evil vendor problem or an open source problem. It's actually a business model problem that the business of healthcare is that intensive episodic healthcare model where you go someplace, you get treated, and you come. And so by and large, we've created IT systems that are centered around that business problem of I go places, I get treated, I come back. And we've got great, well, not so great, but we've got decent health IT systems for that business problem. We don't have decent health IT systems for the collaborative, patient-centered model of care. And what's going on right now, and I think when you look at Connect and you look at all these projects, you look at NHIN Direct, you need to place this in the context of this evolution in care delivery models, this evolution in business models for healthcare from episodic, single-place systems to multi-place, multi-setting of care, longitudinal systems. And if you do that, you need to start thinking about, well, how does the information get from here to there? How do the two people who collaborate on my care know what's going on about me so they can actually do that care collaboration? So this is the state of the art in health information exchange. If you ask any physician, what is the baseline model for health information exchange? It's the fax, it's the courier, right? By and large, you go to a clinical practice, and even if they got a fancy electronic health record, the lab data comes in on pieces of paper in a fax machine or comes in as courier documents that come into you. That's not very nice. So if you want to make great treatment decisions, you need to have electronic data. You need to be able to start converting from faxes and couriers and pieces of paper to systems that actually gather that data electronically across multiple settings of care. All right. Meaningful use, and you heard a little bit about meaningful use this morning. Meaningful use is actually, Dave mentioned $19 billion. It's actually $39 billion of investment and then net savings that claw that back down to 19. So there's actually a ton of money on the table for health information transformation. And a lot of that money is going out to people who do health information technology across states and recs and EHR vendors and doctors and all that stuff. So one of the great things about that money is to get that money, you don't have to show that you adopted technology, and you don't even have to show that you've got features and functions and whiz-bangs that you do. You actually have to show that you're doing real stuff to improve the health and healthcare and transparency and access for patients. And there are things like providing patients with electronic copies of their health information or discharge information upon request, giving clinical summaries for patients, getting lab test results incorporated into your electronic health records so you actually do interesting things with them. It goes on and on and on. And if you look at these, the common denominator is that these are outcomes-driven objectives for which you get paid for adoption of electronic health technology, and they, by and large, are driving to a care delivery model that's not centered on one single location of care. They're driving to a care delivery model. It's about exchange of data across multiple settings of care. Okay, so we've got all these great stuff. We've got a fax machine and a courier. We need to transition to a model of electronic health information. Where is the at sign for healthcare? Email was the killer app for the internet. Now then we developed web browsers and things you could do with web browsers that typically were unsavory at the very beginning. But email was the killer app for the internet. You had to get that internet thing so you could get your email. That's what a lot of people thought. What we need to begin with is something that's super basic that solves that email problem for healthcare, that allows anybody practicing medicine to send information to anybody else practicing medicine with appropriate consents and privacy and security. So we need to be able to have that @sign, but we need to have a secure @sign. And we need to be able to get that information where it needs to go. There was a great story that was told. There's this organization called the Health Information Technology Standards Committee that was formed by ARA to advise HHS in the disposition of all this money and advise us on standards. And there was a testimony that was given on adoption of health information technology. And one of the most kind of mind-boggling points for, I think, a lot of the people who were around that room, who actually represented the big organizations that by and large had already made movements to this new world, was a physician practicing out in the middle of Pennsylvania, who'd been an early adopter of health information technology, had an EHR, and was struggling getting a paper-free practice. And he told a bunch of stories. One of the most compelling was he had this patient that was being referred from his practice because she was moving to Arizona. He happened to know the physician that she was going to be seeing in Arizona because they were golf buddies or whatever. And he happened to know they both had the same electronic health record system, and he happened to know they both could import and export a document that encapsulated the health information for that patient. Great, okay. So now she's going to get great treatment in Arizona, except he had no way of securely getting that document over to the physician in Arizona. No way. So he was thinking, okay, what could I do? I could burn it to a CD and mail it over to the physician. That's kind of unelegant. What he ended up doing was doing something really simple, encrypting it in a zip file and then emailing it to the physician in Arizona. But it highlighted a problem, which is, okay, we've got a technologically savvy doctor who has the means to send to another technologically savvy doctor, but no easily accessible common system for getting there. So that's what the NHIN Direct project is all about, extending the NHIN to all of the physicians and clinicians and patients, all of us in the country, to give the @sign for healthcare. Universal addressing that's secure, that allows for information that wants to travel to get there and get there securely and get where it's intended. I'm not going to go over all these words. But it's got nice things like secure and meaningful exchange and meaningful use and all that good stuff in it. And it also has this notion that the way that you get health information exchange is you got a couple services, standards, policies, and a trust fabric. So trust is really, really important in healthcare. The model that we wanted to go about doing this work, the cruise ship model, where I'm Julie, the cruise ship director, is a focused collaboration model. This is a slide that Anish Chopra uses a lot about how to use and have government work with industry to get innovation. And there's a couple of models that governments tried in the past. One model is command and control. Government shall tell you what you'll do. Well, that's a great model if you really want to be doing what government's currently doing. I had a great experience. I needed to get a badge so I could actually go through physical security. All the government buildings have tight physical security. It's actually laughable easy to go around. And to get a badge, I needed to go to a security office that had forms, physical paper forms. Kind of funny, right? And these physical paper forms had actually been copied, and then the copies had been recopied, and the recopied copies had been recopied. And so you get that lovely distortion that you get on the forms. And you had to fill all these things out in paper, and there's duplicate information, and then you hand it in, and then somebody keys it in, and then they give you an email that gives you another, actually an online thing. But then you go to the online thing, and then you spit out a PDF, and then you mail that PDF. It's strange. So that's what you're going to get if you get a command and control model. The other model is, okay, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's just let innovation happen all over the place. And that's great. That's a great model. It's actually, I think, a little preferable to a command and control model. But you end up getting lots of participation, but you end up getting very low focus. And when you've got a time in history where we want to make something happen, We want to make this care transition model happen. We want to have providers get their dollars so that they get their EHRs, so that we get all the cool outcomes that we want. We need to figure out a way that's somewhere between command and control and 1,000 flowers bloom. And the model is a focused collaboration model where we come up with a core set of outcomes, the coordinates for the ship. But then we need transparency, engagement, and rapid results. And so what we did was we created this NHIN Direct project. We got 60-some organizations that signed up and said, yeah, I want a piece of that. And we locked them in the cruise ship, and we said, hey, by going on this cruise ship, you don't exit until you actually deliver something. And it has to be delivered something that's real, in the real world, that actually delivers real value. So this is not about connect-a-thons and showing stuff that works on paper and works in simulated labs. It's actually got to be stuff that works in practice. The way we went about doing that was, duh for anybody who does open source projects, but kind of new for government. We had a wiki, all the documentation's available in the wiki. We've got a blog that I don't update nearly as often as I should, and we've had open source code repositories. And what that's allowed us to do is do business in a highly transparent way so that anybody who wants to can figure out what's going on, can contribute in 1,000 different ways, and can make meaningful participation and meaningful change in the direction the project. And we've gotten a lot of surprising things. We've gotten small companies out in the middle of nowhere that never would have participated in a classic big government or big standards organization kind of project who actually had really, really cool ideas and motivation to contribute and have done really amazing things with that. We did, as I said, what any open source project would do, but it's actually pretty cool for government. So what we wanted to do in this project was create a health information exchange that looks like the internet, that's modeled after the kinds of end-to-end, loosely coupled model that we have for internet connectivity, where all I need to know is your address, whether it's a URI or an email address, and I can get to you. So we wanted to do universal addressing. We wanted to make sure we're using DNS for address resolution. We wanted to make sure that we're building on the best that IETF has. And we wanted to enable internet scale, so you don't need a central authority to hook people up. So one of the differences between the NHIN Direct project and the current NHIN Exchange is the NHIN Exchange is a high-trust, central authority kind of project. This is a decentralized trust mechanism for broad-scale distribution for a bunch of participants. And likely what's going to happen is that broad-scale model will drive towards actually a more centralized high-trust model. To get this thing working, we have a problem. This isn't Facebook. Healthcare is not Facebook. This isn't not that I have anything to diss about Facebook except for selling my personal information to advertisers. But this isn't about sharing social information to a cluster of friends. This is about sharing your health information to somebody else. You kind of want to make sure that it gets there securely. You want to make sure that we're maintaining your privacy. Now, what makes this really difficult is that healthcare is local and heavily decentralized. What this means is that there's actually been some good models for how to do high security, high-scale kinds of information exchange. If you look at financial services, there's a really interesting project called PCI DSS, if you're in the credit card world, that has really, really strong information security procedures. And your credit card information used to get lost all the time. You used to hear about how the credit card information, thousands of credit cards, millions of credit cards were lost, right? You don't as much anymore because there's actually, to do credit card processing, you've got to make sure all the credit card data is encrypted. You've got to make sure that you're not storing the three-number code. There's a bunch of stuff that you need to make sure that you're not doing. And there's been a centralized model that the credit card industry did, primarily because they were afraid the government was going to do it for them, to create high trust. Can't do that in healthcare because healthcare is so dramatically decentralized. Now, scalable, distributed, and decentralized trust is a hard problem. And a lot of the energy and angst, we actually found out 4 different ways from a technology perspective to do the kinds of simple interoperability that we're looking for. It's not rocket science. Actually, the rocket science part of this was the scalable, distributed, and decentralized trust, and most of the cat herding that went along in the project actually occurred around this. So where did we end up? We ended up using, so this problem kind of looks like secure email, so we just said, okay, well, at the end of the day, let's make it secure email. We're using off-the-shelf technology, SMIME, SMTP over TLS as our backbone. And a lot of the energy that we put into this is the model for how you enforce trust across two different exchanges. So if I'm sending information to you and you're receiving it, do you trust that that sender actually is who he or she purports to be? Do you trust that the security standards and privacy standards that they adhere to meet your minimum criteria? And so we end up using digital certificates, X509 certificates, and put in place a description of a trust model that allows this to happen. And then we use standard SMIME as our mechanism for enforcing that, so that the message as received can't physically be seen, except as a string of meaningless bits, unless the receiver actually is authorized to receive it. And once they receive it, they can also verify that it came from where it purported to come from. The tricky thing here is so why don't we all use SMIME? Because distribution of keys is a really hard problem. So the other part that we worked on was a model for how key management could actually get done by a third party on behalf of the provider. So that the provider can either do it themselves if they've got the means to do it, or can delegate the authority to what we're calling a HISP, Health Information Service Provider, who can handle the encryption, decryption, and verification on the provider's behalf. So where are we right now? We're in the mode where we've done all the deep thinking, and we've done all the consensusizing, and we've done all the cat herding. And we're in a mode right now where this entire project is and will live and die by open source code development. And so this is a fabulous opportunity right now for people to get involved in the project, because where this is going to be extraordinarily successful is where there's a set of libraries off the shelf that anybody can use, deploy, and manage to implement the services. We've got all of our reference implementation code that's released under a BSD license. We're using a BSD license because we've got a mixture of open source and proprietary companies. So we want to make sure that we've got a strong open source component that people can take and move on with, but that we're not creating any licensing issues for the proprietary companies that want to do that. All of our content's licensed under a Creative Commons license. And then, as I said, it's 100% transparency. All the decisions, meeting notes, discussions are published in the wiki, and here are the 3 places to go. We're just now, we did a set of essentially demonstration projects where we did real code. We built 4 different working systems for interoperability, proved that they all worked out. And we're taking aspects of all of those things and merging into a code base that's hosted on Google Code, code.google.com/p/NHIN space or -d, which is our open source code repository. There's actually one major component that's checked in right now, another one that'll be checked in later today. So the first components of this are starting to be there, and we're building out the code libraries that all the developers and all the implementers will end up using. So what we'd love to do is get people involved in this work and create a robust, vibrant open source community around these kinds of simple interoperability components. So if you're an SMTP, IMAP4, SMIME, or security expert, love to have you and love to get you involved. If you're a general technologist looking to enter into the world of healthcare because you've heard, wow, $39 billion, some of that might come to me. Again, we'd love to have you work on the open source reference implementation, work on unit tests, work on documentation. There's a ton of stuff to do. And then if you're actually building open source healthcare projects, modules, those kinds of things, what we'd love for you to do is try to integrate the reference implementations into your application or service. Let us know how it goes. Let us know what we can fix. Help us fix it, ideally. And we'd love to work with you on that. We've currently got reference implementations in Java and C#. That ends up being the kind of sweet spot for for healthcare is pretty much all systems are, if you get the Java or .NET systems, that's 99% of all health information technology systems. It's sad for me because I'm a Ruby guy, but that's okay. I can deal with it. But we would love to have implementations in, insert your crazy language of choice that implement the services. So that is it. And what I'd love to do is either have, questions for me, questions for Dave. I think we can mix and match. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the question is, how do you do discovery and provenance of data? The major use case for the NHIN Direct project is I've got information and I know where it needs to go, and I just need a simple mechanism for getting it from point A to point B. So it's the email of healthcare. Actually, the standards that David Riley's working on in the Connect project that the NHIN currently implements do discovery. So, okay, who's this patient? Where else have they been seen? What data exists about them? Queries for the information and then is able to pull it back in. The reason you need both models is that there are some aspects of healthcare where you do know both parties of the transaction, and pushing it from one to the other makes a lot of sense. And then there are other aspects of healthcare where they've been seen, but you don't know where the data is, and so you want to pull it, query for it, and pull it. So the answer to that question is we're trying to solve that problem's actually underway, and there's a lot of work that's being done right now to solve that problem. We're trying to solve a slightly different problem, which is how do we get simple push transactions as broadly distributed as possible. Right.
I mean, are you talking with other federal agencies about what that means? Like, it has implications for electronic voting projects too.
Yeah. So national ID, for people who don't know, is like the third rail of anything. Because anyway, I won't even go there. So where I think in healthcare, where I think we're likely to get to is a voluntary address that the patient can maintain and provide around to providers and say, hey, this is the central linkage point, and if you need my information, you can also use that address to go get it if I give you authorization. So I think we're going to get some kind of voluntary patient identifier that's somewhat akin to a health URL as a mechanism for identity and for exchange. Patient identity, as I'm sure David will tell you, is just the worst problem in health information exchange right now. If you could solve the patient identity problem, well, semantic interoperability and patient identity, it's kind of like the Monty Python skit. Anyway, it's a hard problem. Among the many problems are patient identity and semantic interoperability. But if you could take that problem off the table, then health information exchange would be significantly simpler. And where I think we're likely to get to is a voluntary, patient URI or some sort.
Well, decentralized in an open ID style way too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So
The problem sounds a lot like DNS and OpenID.
it does sound a lot like DNS and OpenID, and so probably at the end it'll be something that's DNS and OpenID, right? So it would be great if you could use your health internet address as an OpenID token, and we'll get there. We'll get there. It's healthcare, so it'll take a little while. Okay. Yeah, so the project that I'm doing is a simpler project of I've got A and B and I need to push it, but I do believe that where this is going to end up is a voluntary, identifier that I can give around to multiple providers and they'll use as an access point.
But even with the simple push, are you designing a
Standardized address. Standardized address. Schema is a little different, so we're trying to solve the transport problem. We're trying to solve the HTTP problem or the SMTP problem using SMTP. And then the standardized schema is about how does that data look when it goes from point A to point B. I think there's going to be a lot more evolution there. There's a lot more to come here in health information exchange. So right now we're just now starting to be able to send around, okay, here's the med list. And I can receive the med list. Allergy list, whoa, that's really tricky. Conditions, problems, I can probably do that if I upgrade my systems. So we're working on that, but then there's a lot of other innovation that needs to happen on the content space, like gaps in care, right? I'd love to be able to, I've got systems that can mine your data and figure out what, you're a diabetic, but you haven't had your A1C, or it's been this kind of trend. I can tell you it, but now I need to be able to push that information in a computable way that a physician can. There's all kinds of really interesting content innovations, and I'm going to expect that to be one of the key areas of innovation in healthcare over the next 10 years.
Yeah. So this is a comment, but there's actually a good technological solution to the patient ID problem, but I think there'll be cultural barriers to accepting it, which is it turns out to be incredibly easy, incredibly cheap, and incredibly reliable to do a retinal scan. And you can take the retinal scan and reduce it to a 512-point number. So you put two 512-point numbers inside the patient record. That patient record gets sent over, so now you don't have to worry about the patient ID, but essentially you match the retinal scan. So in some sense it's secure because you're not really publishing an ID, but what you're actually sending over is the record, and you're making sure that the record matches the patient at the other end. But I think there'll be some cultural barriers to adopting something like this. And there's a couple of minor barriers as well, like what happens if the patient happens to be in a cold zone.
Right. Right. That definitely there's a black helicopter moment there. The other thing that I've heard about that is that okay, if I steal your address, I can always change it, but if I steal your retinal scan, then you can't really change that very easily. Outside of Minority Report, right? Although I never did figure out how the retinal pattern actually maintained stable over the many hours that he was. Never mind. I'm going far afield. Sorry. Next question.
Actually, DNA is really what you would ultimately want to identify.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So the tinfoil hat and black helicopter crowd will love that as well. Yeah, that's right. That's true as well. Yeah.
From a purely process perspective, do either of you have any information on or any estimates for the amount of money that you save the government by using an open source process versus an equivalent development process?
I'm going to pass that on to you because you've got evidence. I don't have any evidence.
In the Connect project, the way we've calculated the savings to the federal government is, we obviously have multiple agencies involved. If each of the agencies was doing their own development individually, then obviously there would be a basic cost across that number of agencies. And so what we did in this project, by pooling our funds together, our pennies, and doing it one time, we believed that we were going to save some money. So with the 7 agencies that we have today, if all 7 of them did development individually and used a just average performing government contractor,
Like you.
yeah, then the cost savings is about $195 million for the 2.5 years of the project so far. In terms of the percentage of that is what we've saved by doing the approach that we've taken today. So the approach that we've taken today, we've spent to date about, I think we're about 12 and a half or $13 million. So the actual cost would have been over $200 million if they'd done it, all 7 agencies on their own. Now, I'm a pretty hard taskmaster when it comes to managing projects, and so financial performance is important to me. And if we don't get it, I fire them and get a new contractor. So with the contractor that we've got now, the performance the level that we're performing at, if you look at Capers-Jones data, and he's got about 30,000 projects, both in the federal space and private sector, software projects where he's collected data on it and metrics about productivity and cost per function point, those kinds of things. We're performing in about the 90th percentile in terms of cost per function point, cost per story point, those kinds of things. So we've got a really high-performing team, and that comes from a lot of scar tissue doing these kinds of projects in the federal space and understanding what tools and people and process have to be brought together to be able to achieve that. And so this is probably the most highly productive team that I've ever put together in 20 years of doing this right now.
Of course, with the possibility of mileage varying, do you think that financial performance, you could extrapolate that into the private sector, into care delivery side?
We're looking at models of how to do that. I've got a couple of PhDs in finance that understand healthcare financing that are working with me to try to figure out how to extend that. I can tell you that if we assume that all 7 agencies had a contractor who performed at the exact same level that we are performing at right now, the savings is still $35 to $40 million over what we've expended to date. Yes, Denise.
Not that you need a huge attaboy. I'm going to say it anyway. I've been really excited about this project since I heard about it, because what this is doing is teaching the federal government that this really is the way to develop going forward. And it's safe, and it's possible to get a lot done. And I'm just really happy that Dave was at a place in his career where he could make it happen. He's gotten the right people involved, and I just think it's a great thing.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I would like to point out that if we get all of the federal agencies that touch healthcare data up and running on Connect and using the model that we currently have and do that within the next 5 years, the life cycle cost savings to the federal government will be over $1 billion by taking this approach.
I'll just stand here. Yeah. Who's
I'm curious about the connection between Connect and the NHIN direct stuff. So you said that you're looking at implementing this stuff in Connect. So is that implementation such that you will be able to take the data the structure of the data you had in Connect and be able to just use the
So the best way to think about it is the direct project is a project to create a standard for how to do this, and the Connect software is software that instantiates a bunch of different standards off the shelf.
Yeah, one of the things that we did when we were doing the Connect and even the NHIN production exchange, that first year of the trial implementations, was really focused on HIE to HIE exchange. So we assumed that it was self-defining, self-organizing, self-structuring these organizations would be. And once they defined their boundaries, then what we were looking at was from one edge to the next, how you would move data back and forth between them. We left all the details of internal to that, down at a provider level. We said, that's up to you guys, because they basically pushed back and said, it's not in scope of contract, blah, blah, blah. We made all kinds of arguments about it. But fundamentally, we said, okay, that's a hard problem for right now. We'll get to it. Let's solve this other problem. And then Arien's come along, and so he's focusing on that inside. That my view of it is initially it was kind of inside the HIE, for provider to provider, kind of push direct. We know each other, so I'm going to send you something. That's how the fax world works. Now, obviously, it can extend beyond that. So the incorporation of that model into this larger model, filling in the details and all the spaces in between, is what we're trying to work out. So until we get good, solid specs, and I think we're almost there. Now I can begin to look at how we would do that integration and make it work in the production exchange environment where we have multiple levels of trust or layers of trust or circles of trust, whatever the way you want to express that, so that we have the ability to get the data where it needs to go. Because fundamentally, data needs to be at the point of the decision in order to influence cost. Because when providers make decisions, that's when you commit resources, and that's when cost gets added to the system.
Question, David. Of your team, how was that proportioned out? Because you talked about you have contractors, and then you also were using the community for development. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting juggling trick. The whole first year, it was just government contracting because it was a government project, basically. And then when the federal partners pushed me to open it up to the open source community, to make it an open source project and open it up to this larger community. So they're like, let's get all these people involved. It's great. We can innovate, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, we want to make sure our needs are prioritized first and you don't miss any of our deadlines and requirements. Okay, so how do we make that work in terms of community? I don't have a good answer for that. You know, I have to meet contractual obligations to the federal partners. You know, we do interagency agreements when they send money over to fund the project that I have to deliver on, and then I have a contract that I let to a development organization. Harris is our prime. They have Agilex and Senpro as subs. And so they're under contract to me to deliver things to meet these other deliverables. I have written into the contract things about supporting the open source community, doing the forums, you know, making sure that they monitor it and respond within a given amount of time. So they have metrics related to interacting with the open source community. And I'd say, Brian, and maybe you agree or don't agree, I'd be interested in your opinion, that to date we've been able to achieve a fairly significant amount of interaction, but there's still a ways to go yet. And so I'm open to ideas there of how to make it to work. I mean, we've so far I think we've been somewhat successful with it, but I'd like to see more success, more involvement, more engagement than what we've got. But again, I have to walk that balance that says I have to deliver to these federal agencies, and if they're my funding partners and they set a priority that needs to be done, then it has to be done. You know.
And I was wondering, you said you had 2 weeks sprints.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you said? That's pretty aggressive.
Yes.
I'll add to that. You know, the main focus that I've had in working with the project has been to make the existing processes as transparent as possible. So there's a Jira instance, there's a Subversion repository, there's all the artifacts involved in the development process are out there in the public. There's still a set of things, the user stories that we're working on getting out there, but all of the meat of what actually goes on, and particularly with the sprints, are out there as well. When sprints are started, there's kind of a here's where we're going, here's what we're going to work on, and then when they're concluded, that gets up as well. We've also encouraged all of the developers, when they start working on something, to post to the forums and look for advice, right? When there's desire to add a new feature here or integrate with something there, then take it there and look for feedback. And that's worked out really well. And listening to the questions that get asked in the forum has helped make the product more installable, more have a better out-of-the-box experience. And by making it transparent, we've allowed organizations like Red Hat, like Object Computing, and like Mirth to be able to be very opportunistic, right? So when they show up with, here's a set of patches that implement a feature with the tests also included, right? It becomes much easier for them to integrate in than if it's, here's an overnight hack would be, right? Or I have an idea, I want somebody else to code, right? I think that's the right balancing act. And I think as we get more contributors, as it grows, I mean, every community does take time to grow, to be a real multi-vendor, multi-participant, multi-everything community, then more and more of the kind of command and control of the project can shift to be outside of the team that's funded to be even a much broader team. For now, it's really be as transparent and be as opportunistic as possible, and recognize contributions from the outside as well. That's why we've made certain individuals who have contributed to the project outside, core committers on the project, with the long-term goal that eventually the majority of them will be ones who don't have this particular contract with the government.
Yeah, right now, I think we've got 4 or 5 that we've added from the community.
It's 5 outside.
5 outside the community, and my core development team is only 12 that are under contract. So we're nearly have half again as many that are outside from the community, involved with it. So. But our sprints run from Wednesday to Wednesday, 2 weeks. So today was actually sprint review day, and we go through that on Wednesday morning and do sprint planning and then march out smartly.
So do you contribute to your backlog?
I do. I help manage the backlog. I review it on almost a daily basis. We have about 50,000 stories in the backlog related to meaningful use right now, and so it's a constant struggle. I know, based on the metrics that I have, I know pretty much exactly, I can predict with a high degree of accuracy what we can deliver in a given time frame, and the number of the story point velocity that the team achieves each sprint. and I monitor that on a daily basis. I have burn down charts and all that, the typical stuff you would have in Agile. So I keep track of all that, and then I groom the backlog on a regular basis, and then we have product managers from each of the federal agencies, and we meet on a weekly basis. And I have an architecture group that has architects from both the private sector and from the federal partners that engage. We have 2 days of architecture meetings a month, and then we have quarterly CCB, which plans for the next release cycle and gets all the things approved for that, and then we go into the release cycle. So it's a 3-month release cycle with 2-week sprints. Yeah. Yes?
Can I ask quickly, do you see a way, knowing how government is required to operate as far as its acquisition and funding of projects, do you see a good way to provide a means for developing elastic resources? And I don't mean technology resources, I mean people resources.
Interesting that you would bring that up. In the next version of the contract, I intend to add just that capability. It's an agile process for subcontracting. Well, I think I figured out a mechanism to do it that's within the acquisition law and guidelines, and so far the attorneys have reviewed it and said, yeah, we should go ahead with it. Now, whether it will actually work in practice, my intent is to collect data on it and assess at the end of the first contract year whether it actually is successful or not. And I have a set of criteria for success, and if it is, then we will continue to utilize that. So what I envision is the ability to post for short jobs or small jobs that might be anything from just 1 story's worth of work to maybe it's $250,000 worth of work. I don't know. It may be something that one person could do or a team could do. And we have a rapid bid process, and the contractor manages that and makes an award and then is responsible for delivery of that under the context of the project. And so we have a mechanism that we're exploring for how to do that. And I think I'm pretty excited about it. We'll see. In a year, I'll know whether it's going to work or not and have the data to say whether it worked or not.
Does the dollars you're spending or anything lower the bar on contracting requirements as far as the entities you're able to work with? You don't need to use GSA.
Well, a lot of this has to do with the contracting mechanism that you use, the contract vehicle itself, and the type of contract that we're using. Basically, this work's being done under GSA contract, the IT-70 schedule, and so there are requirements that I have to solicit for bids from small companies, small disadvantaged businesses, and that kind of thing. And generally, the big primes will partner with smaller companies because they have to meet their obligations with respect to small businesses being a part of their team.
And still working for a bigger entity that has to sub this stuff out that has the capability to do it.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is take one of the things that the large integrators around the Beltway are good at is managing subcontracts. They may not be good at much else, but such a cynic I am. But given the right approach, you can actually get performance out of them, and I think this project demonstrates that. So. Right. No, I watch that very closely in terms of what the dollars we're spending and what the overhead rates are and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So you guys have basically kind of given a call to action here. You said, people want to help in bringing the great job of spelling out different ways. Help, but for the people watching on the video or people here in this room, maybe they have friends, where's the best place for them to start?
Well, I'd say go to the websites, nindirect.org and connectopensource.org, and get on the forums, read the wikis, figure out where your interests lie. In our website, you'll see all the documentation in terms of designs and stories and story plans and all those kinds of things, and figure out where you fit and what you want to work on, and then make contact. Don't be shy. I mean, we don't bite. And if we do, we've had our shots. So, and we want people at the party. And so with Connect, we have our codathons on a quarterly basis. We have webinars and training seminars. So there's lots of opportunities, and all that stuff's up on the website in terms of dates and times and for engagement. And if you want to get into the architecture discussions, it's pretty much open. The website tells when they're going to be in the dial-in numbers and all that stuff. So we welcome the participation. It's kind of self-selecting. So.
Yeah, the other thing I'd mention is that if you're truly, if you're in healthcare and you've got a reason, you've got an itch you want to scratch, then that's a great way to get involved. If you're outside of healthcare or looking to enter in, one of the easiest ways to be able to do that is writing unit tests. That it's a really good way to learn the code base, a really good way to learn what's going on, and adds a tremendous amount of value to the code set if you can do that. So if you're truly outside, that might be one of the better ways to jump in early.
Yeah, Scott Borst is our lead tester, and you would be his best friend if you were interested in writing tests. I'm pretty compulsive about testing in terms of the software itself, and so we have literally, I think we're around 2,000 tests that we run either with every build or every day against the baseline of code that's being developed.
So that's probably a good note to